Thank you all for joining me and welcome to my soon-to-be new home. It's not much here, is there? It's just a forest, a little outside of Atlanta, Georgia, where I live. But this is going to be the place where I spend the most time. I can guarantee that. Now, I've been to a lot of cities around the world. They all have their own unique personalities. There's the charm of Dublin. There's the beauty of Athens and everywhere else in Greece. There's the energy of Tokyo. And here in the US, Seattle, San Francisco, New Orleans, I've been to all of them. So what's so special about this place? Why am I going to be spending so much time here? This is where my grave is. Where does life end and death begin? Death and I have danced before. We're on intimate terms. I ask the question over and over. But death doesn't willingly give up its secrets. It only moves relentlessly. No pause, no rest. No exceptions. I lost both of my parents within the last year. First my father, then 6 months later, my mother. Only now have I had the strength to accept that they're gone and place their images on my ancestor altar. The link between me and all those who have gone before me, back to the first beginnings in Guinea. Guinea, the point of origins for those, like me, who follow the path of voodoo. Does it frighten you, or amuse you, to find out that I, a modern human, college-educated, with decades of experience in the fact-driven news industry, deal with voodoo? You're entitled to your opinion. I base my beliefs on my personal experience. Voodoo and its spirits, the Loa, have been a source of comfort to me through the years. They've helped me through my darkest hours. But the one thing they won't give me is an answer to this question. What is death? What gives it the right to take those we love from us, sometimes softly, sometimes in the most horrible ways imaginable? Why does every one of us, with no exception, have to bow down to death? Even the saints must bow to death. There is no remission, no leeway, no exception. No guarantee about when or how we die. If le bon Dieu, the good God, doesn't spare his own saints, is it because he won't or can't stop the power of death? Death smiles at me in silence. The saints in the Loire won't give me answers, so I'll have to find out the truth myself. I already know I can't do it alone. The first answer I need is who will help me on this journey. There are ways to pry knowledge like that from the universe. My go-to method is the tarot. All possibilities lie within these cards, if you know how to read them. The first card, myself, the magician. No interpretation needed. The energy surrounding me now, death. So far, so simple. An influence coming into play now. Travels and journeys with a purpose. The Chariot, a charismatic leader who can marshal forces for any task. A keystone for the task at hand, strength. Someone who is solid, reliable, capable of overcoming any obstacle. The influence affecting us all, the world, striving to perfect our knowledge and development. The next card is the wild card, unexpected influence, the devil. This could prove interesting. The final outcome of my quest, the moon. A card that signifies that which cannot be revealed or even anticipated. As the moon veils herself in the clouds, the ultimate success or failure of this venture will not be revealed until I've completed the task. So, 3 people to help me with this task, signified by the Chariot, Strength, and the Devil. Sounds like a shopping list from heaven, or somewhere. Sometimes the universe brings you what you need on its own. But why wait? I knew exactly who fit these profiles and could help me document my journey.
So Morgan and I have been friends for a couple of years now, and when he approached me about creating this documentary, I was like, whoa, this is a documentary about death culture. That's something I have not seen, and I've seen documentaries on just about everything. And so when he was like, let's travel the United States and interview all these strange individuals that all have different stories. Some of them are going to be science-based, some of them are going to be faith-based, some of them are just going to be individuals repeating the experiences they've had to a camera. And he said, why don't you make a team and let's go make this? And I just felt honored to be part of it. And overall, I knew we were going to create a story that had never been told before. I'm the co-producer and the director of photography for this project, so there are some obvious strengths that I bring to the table. I think one of my really great strengths that I don't often get to use because I'm behind the camera most of the time is interviewing people and getting to know their story. Being the director of photography means I get to point all the cameras at places and decide how the shots are made and pretty much design the visual look. And maybe I've done this on some other projects that were pointed in a different direction, like food and corporate video, but this time we're going to tell real human stories.
Knowing that this documentary is going to involve death is something that has greatly intimidated me a lot. It's something that I've always sort of avoided in my life. Even when it comes to something as simple as a funeral, it's something that I've always never really enjoyed going to. And I've always sort of just like put it in the closet, so to speak. I never really wanted to see it and I wanted to keep it dark. This documentary is basically giving me the opportunity to take all of that dark stuff that I have locked away and to bring it into the light. As far as what I'm actually bringing to this documentary, I mean, clearly I'm the best looking member of the group. I think that's something no one can deny. Sorry. I can shoot. I am tech support. I can work with just about any single piece of equipment. I can work as an infield producer, and I honestly think this was the best way to stretch my wings. Preparing for this documentary, I've been asking myself, what is it that I am afraid of?
I'm afraid of spiders and the Burger King guy.
And ultimately what I think I'm most afraid of is what's actually in my own mind. It's something that people can't see. It's something that only I know. I'm afraid that if I learn too much, it's going to open a barrier that frankly I just can't close anymore. and it's something that I'm going to just have to constantly relive in my mind over and over again. And that scares me. It scares me knowing that I'm not exactly going to be the same after this documentary has been completed.
So how's my hair? I am the troublemaker, I would say, of the gang. I bring a little bit more attitude than it's always wanted, but sometimes it's the cynicism that really just kind of puts the icing on the cake. It's that little bit of entertainment, that harsh reality kind of humor, and I think that in this environment and on this topic, it's definitely gonna be abundant. So I have a moderate background in cinema, and I've actually done a couple of documentaries in my day. On this project, I'm actually gonna be one of the camera operators and the lead video editor. So I think this is right down my alley of interest. I hope that I'll be able to, hold my end and keep my composure and, match up the same work ethic that the rest of my team has, and I believe at this point we will.
I think the concept of a documentary is an educational process. You don't shoot a documentary and not learn something. How can you go talk to all these different experts on all these different topics and not learn something? Well, I'm great at separating myself from the subject matter in front of my camera. But when you're doing a documentary, there is no escape from what you face, what you record, and what you experience. And I feel like one of the biggest takeaways is, where am I comfortable thinking about my own death and the topic of death?
Death is dark, it is taboo, it's something that none of us want to face, but death is easy. It just happens. None of us have to try at it. None of us have to think about it. Life, on the other hand, life is a struggle. Even if you've got a good life, life is a drama with bits of, action and comedy thrown in there from time to time. And I think that the big lesson that we're gonna all take away from this is valuing our lives, valuing the lives that we've been given for every little thing that they can be.
By far, one of the things I am most excited about experiencing during this project is the stories, the people, and the locations. We are hoping to travel all over the United States, and who knows who we're going to meet along the way. And I know that I'm going to experience something that I was not prepared for.
What happens to us when we die? I'm not talking about the spiritual sense. We'll be dealing with that a little bit later in this series. I'm talking about this, our bodies. What happens to this when we die? These are very important. Our bodies, we live with them, we love with them, laugh with them, we cry with them too, and it's true, some people only know pain with their bodies in their lives. But whenever anybody else thinks of us, whenever we think of ourselves, this is the image that comes to mind. So what does happen with all this when we die? Strangely enough, for most people, it's not too different than what happened in ancient Egypt thousands of years ago. Those who could afford it had excellent after-death care. Bodies were embalmed in a complicated process that took months. The inner organs were taken out and placed in special jars. Moisture was removed by placing the body in a vat of mineral salts, and then the body was wrapped in bandages soaked in rosins like myrrh for preservation.
The Egyptians believed these rituals were presided over by Anubis, the jackal-headed god of funeral rites. He was considered to be the guardian of the dead. Unfortunately, Anubis declined our request for an interview. But we found some other guardians of the dead to talk about today's funeral industry. This is Delgado Community College in New Orleans, and it has a solid mortuary science program.
I think the funeral service industry is still a bit of a mystery to a lot of people. With things available on YouTube now, I think it's coming out a little bit more. I was surprised at some of the things that you could find available, but you don't see job postings, in newspapers or things like that for funeral directors embalming. So it's been a mystery for quite a while.
The students go through 2 years of intense training. Today they're working on a key component of the funeral trade, facial reconstruction. There can be many reasons a deceased person needs this. Accidents, of course. Murder, too, can leave a person's face severely damaged. Gunshots to the head, bludgeoning, being pushed off a cliff, and there are diseases that can leave a person's face in need of restorative art. The one thing that everyone who goes into the funeral trade understands is that they have to be ready to deal with anything to make a dead person presentable.
We had a guy was clipped by some helicopter blades. He was trying to work on his own kind of rotor thing, and he chopped his head up into dozens of pieces. And that took about 2 days. An average embalming will probably take you about 2 hours. We had to put together his head, his skull, his muscles, his skin, all that back together in place.
Milton Matichek is one of the students at Delgado. As part of their training, all of the students have to work in a funeral home. Milton has worked in several, and even worked for a coroner's office. In that capacity, he learned that death's touch has a far different impact at night.
During the day, people seem more prepared. They have their paperwork out, they are ready for you to come in, the parking's good. Night death calls are typically unexpected for people. They've woken up in the middle of the night and they went to go check on grandma, she's not breathing anymore, they freak out. Everybody's in their pajamas, I'm tired, traffic's real low, that's a big help. And we're just going in the guise of night, snatching a body out of a house.
Milton started out doing general labor in a funeral home. But one day, the home was overwhelmed with calls to pick up some bodies. His boss asked him if he could pitch in, and he said yes, not knowing what he was about to experience.
My first day was a woman decomposed in her house with no friends or family available. And I was completely shocked. I couldn't have imagined a scene like this with, all of her body fluids going out, stagnating, and her bloating up, and there was flies everywhere, and her mouth's popped open. It was shocking. I almost froze up, but I knew that nobody else was coming for this body. It was me or nobody. So I just went in headlong, tried not to think, and went into a zone and got the body out. And I figured if I could do that, I could keep doing this. Not much worse than that.
All of the students have a personal story about why they chose this field.
So I decided to get into funeral service because when I was younger, I got really into special effects, and I was really interested in restorative art, which is what they're doing right now.
I grew up in church, African American culture, and so funerals were always a part of what we experienced.
I believe about 50% or more of our students in the last couple of years have come in as a second career option. Very few students come out of high school or just a year of college thinking that they want to be a funeral director, embalmer.
Dominic Mikata is a perfect example. He's an associate professor of embalming at Delgado, but started off on a very different career path.
And I originally graduated from Loyola University in New Orleans with a public relations background, and it was very boring sitting in a cubicle. I hated it.
Day or night, every student finds out there are certain personal hurdles they have to overcome.
One of the most difficult things I've had to do with the deceased is children. When a child passes, there's a different presence in the care center when there's a child in there among the embalmers. Dressing them, bathing them, doing their hair. It's different and difficult.
Any student who comes into a mortuary sciences program knows embalming is part of the job, but grasping a concept intellectually and actually doing it are extremely different processes. Some are okay with it, others are in for a rude awakening.
When I observed embalming for the first time, it was quite a surprise to me. It was at an older funeral home in the basement on a concrete floor with older equipment, and just from start to finish. It was not what I had anticipated. In this country, people don't know what happens to them when they pass away.
Well, we want to know. And with his experience in several funeral homes, Milton Matichek is the person to turn to. Fair warning, the next few minutes may be very disturbing to some viewers. We're about to get a demonstration of what really happens during an embalming.
The first steps are pretty basic. Get the deceased off the stretcher and onto an embalming table. Next, you'll position the head on the block. You want to do this because once the embalming process starts, blood could start coming out of the head if it's not raised properly.
After that, you're going to want to get them undressed.
And you do this all by yourself?
Yes, this is a one-man job, yeah. It's just being really careful, not so much any kind of stringent manual labor. You know, you're not hurting yourself doing this. You just have to be very careful.
You may have noticed this dummy is a little unusual. That's because it has characteristics of both sexes. When it comes to embalming, there's no gender discrimination, so this helps students get comfortable. But outside the classroom and in the funeral home, there are a few practical differences.
It's generally the funeral home's practice to go ahead and cover the genitals, give them kind of a dignified wrap or something in that area. Then you want to start closing their eyes and mouth. You take your little eye caps over there, stick them in the eyeball, and then close the lids over it. Use glue, what have you. Then you can sew the mouth shut from the inside using a couple different mandibular suture techniques and all.
The eye caps have small barbs that catch onto the inner skin of the eyelid to keep the lid shut. The caps also help keep the eyes from looking sunken. If that makes you squeamish, you might need to bow out now, because this is where it gets pretty gnarly.
So when you start the arterial embalming, you're going to cut here, round right above the collarbone there. You can make an incision right above the collarbone. In there, that's the common carotid area is what you're looking for. You pick that up, you'll snip it one time, and that lets the blood just drain completely out of the body from that one spot. Then you can snip one of the arteries out of there, and you will take your cannula here from the embalming machine, this piece. That's big enough. That's about how big your artery is. So it'll slip right in, tie it off so it stays, put your fluid in there, cut it with a little bit of water, turn it on, let it shoot through there for about an hour. During this time, you massage everything, try and get the fingers loose, and get the arms kind of limber so they don't just kind of malform up and stiffen. You massage those veins, you'll see blood clots just pop on out. And the water being consistently on, it'll wash it down a drain, and you keep doing that for about an hour. After that, and you see that the dye has gone through, everything's embalmed, it's all stiff and firm. You can take the cannula out, tie those pieces up, and then suture up your incision with the very same needle you use to suture the mouth and all that. Okay, after you're completely sure the arterial embalming is done, everything's firmed and looking nice, go ahead and aspirate the body.
This is something most people don't know about, and we want to warn you again, the descriptions you're about to hear are very graphic.
Okay, you take a trocar, which has two uses. It's this long spear device here with holes. It's about as sharp as one too, it'll go right through you. You attach this to the aspiration machine, which just sucks all bodily fluids and thicker fluids out as well. You will want to go above the navel and just 2 inches over to their left. And you'll take it, and it's very easy because it's so sharp, it just pierces them like that. And the whole machine is sucking at this whole time, and you just go in and out. It's very forceful. It's not very graceful at all when you do this to somebody. You just go in and out, tearing up all their organs all the way around. You fan it, you suck it, you'll see it come through the tube, you'll see just chunks of things coming straight out of it. And that's all the places you want to hit. You want to hit the stomach, lungs, bladder, heart, easy.
So basically you take that and you tear up their entire abdominal cavity from the inside out.
Very shredded.
That's something most people don't know is happening to their loved ones when they're getting embalmed. They just maybe know a little bit about the neck, but they don't know about all the other process.
People will come in a day after they've been embalmed and say, can we get an autopsy? And there's nothing to autopsy. There's nothing to retrieve. It's all torn up in there.
What you've just seen is something the public doesn't hear about very often. It may sound gruesome, but this is what embalmers must do every day to make the deceased as presentable as possible.
What you don't see is the health risk they take exposing themselves to embalming chemicals day after day.
From an environmental perspective, we put something around 800,000 gallons of embalming fluid a year in the ground, which is super carcinogenic. It's super carcinogenic to funeral service professionals who are exposed to it all the time.
When people are embalming, we're exposing ourselves. We're all going to get cancer, and we're all going to get bad backs.
Until the funeral, the body will be checked periodically to make sure it's still presentable. Now you may be thinking, the person's already dead, the body is embalmed, what could possibly go wrong? Well, more than you think.
If you were to get a body on Monday, embalm it on Monday, and the funeral's Friday, that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you come in every day and you check on that body. You want to check and make sure everything's getting it. Nothing's starting to rot, nothing popped, eyes are still closed, mouth is still closed, everything's hydrated, nothing's leaking.
It takes a lot of focus and commitment to pay this much attention to detail. That can be extremely draining. There are emotional tolls as well, both in dealing with the dead and the living.
You have to learn how to disconnect. You can't be emotionally invested in every family that walks through the door, or the job will crush you.
You have to love what you're going into. You have to desire what you're going into, because if that's not the case, you'll have many days of depression, many days of frustration.
It's very difficult physically and mentally. You're dealing with death every single day. It's very physically demanding because you're up all night. You're lifting the deceased, which can be very, very heavy, and you're working under conditions that are very trying.
The pressure can be even greater in small towns, where a single funeral home worker might have to take care of all the details, from working with the family of the deceased, embalming and preparing the body, to coordinating with the cemetery to arrange the gravesite. At Delgado, the students in the program get extensive training in multiple areas.
We have a coursework of 71 semester hours, and that entails everything from, we have embalming, restorative art, we have chemistry, pathology, funeral directing, funeral management, the law course, the ethics course, the psychology. It's very well-rounded, and some students do better in the arts or sciences, but it's definitely a well-rounded field where they have to be proficient in both of those areas, because they're going to be doing contract work as well as working in the embalming room. They're going to be doing restorative art as well as removals, things like this, and they have to know every aspect of the job.
The students and faculty at Delgado have shown us how much passion is needed to succeed in this field and to overcome negative stereotypes about their chosen profession.
A lot of people perceive funeral directors as akin to used car salesmen. And as a person who feels called, to use kind of a highfalutin kind of word, as someone who feels called to work in this industry and has that kind of a background, it's really frustrating that people don't recognize that the majority, I think it's fair to say the majority of the people who work as funeral directors and embalmers, there's a certain amount of nobility into it.
A lot of time when I tell people what I do, I think a kind of a topical reaction is kind of like, oh, that's weird or spooky or dark, but really it's not. It's a very fulfilling profession. If your mom dies or your dad dies, someone, your loved one, and you need to seek a funeral professional to do this and care for them, you're not going to think it's creepy or weird anymore.
We truly care about the deceased that come through. The respect, the level of respect and care and dignity given to everybody that comes through is as if they were our own family, and we love to reflect their life through their funeral. It doesn't have to be doom and gloom. It can be just wonderful.
Now, I could tell the guys were a little numb after the very candid interviews we had at Delgado, so I figured time to give them a distraction. And when it comes to distractions, there's all kinds of things to do and see in New Orleans. There's food, music, and of course a bar or two, or 800. But I thought it was time to do something different, something to take us out of the city, something to bring us back to nature, and maybe see a little wildlife. You know, relaxing stuff.
So we finally made it into the swamp, and on our left is just gators, and on our right, gators.
Here we were in a swamp boat, flying through the swamps of New Orleans, and they were like all around us.
I was expecting to go in there and see practically nothing, and all of a sudden gators were popping up from everywhere.
You know, I expected maybe one or two of these things to pop up out of the water, but nope, they were just hanging out. They'd come right up to us. Our guide would throw swamp crack at them. Evidently, that's what they call marshmallows.
Our boat captain actually was attracting all of these gators to the boat directly with just plain old school marshmallows, and these gators were just eating them up.
I can't tell if they actually liked the taste or if they were just easy to see up against the murky water because they're these big white orbs floating on the water, but the alligators loved them, and there he was flinging out marshmallows the whole time like alligator Santa Claus.
I think the thing that struck me the most about this was just how absolutely beautiful the swamps can be.
To say it was a transcendental experience would be something of an understatement. This is a place that is truly alive. It's a living, breathing ecosystem.
Just, it was nature, and it was nice. It was peaceful, getting out into something that was filled with life and energy.
One of the main things that surprised me is how many animals were around us.
You turn one way, and there's just a gator perfectly set in your line of sight. You look the other way, and oh, hey, there's, an eagle swooping down or an owl coming down.
You could see turtles hanging out on the logs. Within like 5 minutes, we saw eagles sweeping down into the water, catching fish.
So this wasn't just a chance to see something new and exciting, it was also a chance to make some new acquaintances. Say hello to my little friend.
The swamp boat captain pulled out a baby alligator and let us all see it up close. And I got in a little bit of trouble because I tapped its nose because I saw him do it. And he's like, nope.
Right in my hands here, I've got a symbol of what everybody thinks is death. It's a little baby gator. And sure, when you're on the bayou, you think about death, you think about the gators eating things, killing things all the time, you think about the snakes, you think about the birds of prey like the owls swooping down and getting things out of the water or off the little bit of land that's here. But this is not just a place of death. It's a place of life too. Look all around you. There's everything that you could possibly imagine here as far as life is concerned. It's not about death. It's about a circle. It's about a circle of death and life. That's what the bayou means to me. There's no doubt many people have met their end in the swamps of Louisiana, or at least been dumped there after their deaths. Food for the gators, and let's face it, a gator does not live by marshmallows alone. You can't deny it's very efficient. Anything left over when the swamp critters are done is just going to end up decomposing, cycling right back to the ecosystem. Now, that's not the way most people want to get buried. Most of us expect some kind of funeral, and that's what we're going to talk about next. But it's not your ordinary kind of funeral. We want to caution you, this next segment contains images that may be upsetting to some of you. It includes pictures of recently deceased people. Your discretion is advised.
We all have a general idea of what funerals involve. A trip to the funeral home for a viewing, maybe even the funeral service. But that's a fairly recent development in terms of history. Until the 20th century, things were very different. Before then, people expected to wash, dress, and hold viewings for the dead person at home.
Things changed during the Civil War when it was next to impossible to bring many of the dead home quickly enough for a funeral. That's when new science, embalming, really began to take hold, and undertakers became a fixture in society. Embalming preserved bodies of fallen soldiers long enough to let them be taken back to their families. It was a flashy idea, but at first it was only something the well-to-do could afford. It took decades before it became accessible to everyone. Eventually, no one wanted to keep their dead at home.
Are we better or worse off because of that? We'll let you be the judge. But there are some people who say we've gone too far, separated ourselves from the dead too much, and it's time to bring them home. literally. We'll hit the road again to speak with two of them. Destination, North Carolina.
On a rainy spring morning, we end up here. This is the Mineral Dust Meditation Hall, a Buddhist center in Asheville. Carolyn Young is a monastic who lives here at the center. She also heads the Center for End-of-Life Transitions. Today, she and another center worker, Ruth Estranga, are giving us a new way of approaching the death of a loved one. They advocate home funerals, where a person who dies is cared for in the home rather than being sent to a funeral home.
It is legal in almost every state to take care of our own dead. And it is a profound experience to continue the care of your loved one after their last breath and to lovingly take care of them. The body is still warm, it's still flexible, they're in their own home typically. Most of the people that we help are in hospice care and they're in their own home.
In our culture, in our society, because of death being taken out of the home, taken away, that those moments right after the person takes their last breath, usually the first thing that's asked is, well, which funeral home do you want us to call? And instead of that family being right there with the person that has just died, there's this being drawn away from the moment and the importance of being there for their loved one, especially after they have taken that last breath.
So typically for a home funeral, typically we are not called until death has happened. Very few people will plan ahead for their death. So it might be that someone has died in hospice care, a nurse or social worker knows about our project, or a friend of the family, and they suggest that they give us a call. So we would get a call anytime, day or night. We have somebody on call 24 hours a day. We have a traveling kit that's on rollers that has supplies that we might need. It has oils and diapers and things that we might need to tend the body with. We have a massage table that we carry along. And so we take all those supplies with us, and usually we'll try to find another volunteer to go with us to help with the home funeral. And then when we walk in, we're usually greeted very warmly because now there are two people here in the home who know how to help. And we are welcomed into the family. And then there's the creation of the space where the person now is going to lay in state for up to 3 or 4 days. That way, the loved ones can come in and out of this space, not having to wait for visiting hours at a funeral home. They can come in the middle of the night if they need to. And this is very important, especially if it's a child who has died suddenly or anybody who's died suddenly. The family needs to be able to get used to the idea that their loved one has died. And they can walk into the room and be with their loved one and hold their hand and see them. And they can see that they have died.
We've been told so many times by especially mothers and fathers both, but that they don't know how they would have been able to say their goodbyes if they hadn't had their son lying in state in the home, when any time, day or night, they could go in and have a conversation with them.
If the thought of having a dead family member in your home makes you squeamish, remember it used to be a common practice. The body is laid on dry ice to keep it chilled in place of embalming. A representative from the center comes in regularly to check the body's condition, just to ensure it isn't beginning to deteriorate. You can keep the body in the home for several days in the right conditions. Some factors may shorten that time span. If you live in a warmer climate and don't have the best air conditioning, you'll have to move on to burial sooner. And some medical procedures, like certain cancer treatments, also shorten the time you can keep an unembalmed body at home.
And then we also can help with whatever the disposition of the body is going to be, help the family transport their loved one to be cremated, and sometimes in our area, people have buried their loved ones on their own land.
So the more home funerals we've done, the more we see the need for it in the community, and the more people approach us and ask us and see that that's what they want when they die.
I've always been fascinated by Buddhism, and when Carolyn offers me the opportunity to see how the funeral services are performed at the Mineral Dust Buddhist Hall, I couldn't take no for an answer. I didn't know how firsthand things were going to get. The hall is set up with a long table draped with colorful cloths where the deceased is placed during the service. The first order of business is the shroud. The center offers shrouds made by a local artisan, and I'm happy to buy one. We move reverently to the altar, where Carolyn offers a brief prayer over the shroud. We then return to the table, and then the demonstration really gets underway. We unfold the shroud, lay it on the table. Then, something I never imagined I'd do until now, I get on the table, and they proceed to wrap me up as I will be wrapped after I die. After that, Ruth offers wishes for my well-being in future lives.
Morgan Sate Night, we offer the merit of all our good acts to you, so you may realize truth. Homage to all the Buddhas in all worlds. Homage to all the Bodhisattvas in all worlds. Homage to the scripture of great wisdom.
This is called dedicating the merit, a Buddhist tradition that encourages generosity by offering any reward for good deeds or holy acts to someone else, instead of hoping to gain from them yourself.
This has been a profound experience for me. To be wrapped in the shroud I know that one day I'm going to be buried in, here in this beautiful meditation hall in North Carolina. And it's just a good reminder, to me at least, that this physical body I'm in now one day won't be here. It will be returned to the earth from which it came. That's the fate that awaits all of us. We can't avoid it. We had birth, so we have to have death. But I think if I could sum up what I'm feeling right now in one word, it would be peace. I know this is my fate, as it's the fate of all living beings, and I accept that fate. I can't avoid it, so I'd rather embrace it and learn what it means for me and for everyone else. After I get off the table, rather unceremoniously I might add, so we'll just skip those visuals, Carolyn and Ruth refold the shroud for me. Before leaving, I want to pay my respects at the altar. This is not my religion, but I feel grateful for the opportunity to be here, and at least for a little while, to have a chance to briefly meditate on my own death. The Buddha taught that suffering is part of life, and that includes losing our loved ones and ourselves to death.
Homage to the Buddha, to the Dharma, and the Sangha. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings enjoy the great happiness which is free of suffering. May all beings enjoy the great enlightenment, free of passion, aggression, and prejudice. We offer the merit of all our good deeds for the enlightenment of all beings, that they may enjoy the great wisdom.
My hope for everyone is that even if they don't achieve enlightenment in this life, that they understand this life is limited and that death is always just a breath away. Eternal rest grant to them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. I remember those words from the funerals I've attended, most recently the funerals for my parents. I have my own theories on whether there's rest after death and what that really means. After all, resting doesn't mean gone forever. It implies that at some point, someone or something can be active again. Even in physics, rest only means that an object appears to be stationary from a specific perspective or in relation to its surroundings. Take it out of that context, and things are very different.
On some level, we recognize that rest and non-existence are separate. We don't throw away the dead with the trash like we would with anything else no longer appreciated. We put them in a special spot, a place we can come visit and communicate, pay respects, whatever you choose to call it. For many people, the dead aren't really gone, or even resting. They're still active and can hear us, even answer us. So we take care of them, maybe hoping that when we need it, they will take care of us.
There's no better place than New Orleans to look at the many ways the dead can be honored. Here, you can still find people taking care of their dead right in their own backyards. This cemetery is on private land just outside the city. Generations of people have lived here, loved here, and when the time came, they just moved to a different room at the party. Why let a little thing like death cut you out of the fun the rest of your family is having? As they say down here, laissez le bon temps rouler. Let the good times roll. These tombs are beautiful, and they're all cared for by the families. This is amazing to me, because in most of America, cemeteries, let's face it, they're owned by corporations. A corporate gardener takes care of the landscaping. So there's no one there to really take care of the tombs in the respectful, emotional, proper way with love and consideration that you would find like you do in a smaller cemetery like this.
Being buried on your family's land may sound like a great way to keep the fun moving along, but as with any bash, the weather can be a real downer. This cemetery is on the bayou. The owner of the land says when storms roll in, the waters can rise, and so can some of the coffins. It's happened before, and when those coffins start floating, you might not be able to catch them before they get swept out into open water.
If the risk of an unexpected burial at sea is a little much for you, there are more options in New Orleans. Valence is a city-owned cemetery that was established in the mid-1800s. There's plenty of history here, but like many historic places, Valence was hit by the ravages of time. Tombs were in disrepair, and here and there you can still find those that need some work.
Fortunately, there are people who care enough to put in that work. Amanda Walker is one of them. She works with Save Our Cemeteries, a group dedicated to restoring and preserving some of New Orleans' most historic burial grounds. There are unique burial customs in New Orleans, and not every resting place is what it seems on the surface, like this so-called oven vault. If privacy is your thing, this is not for you.
You would often use a wooden casket and slide that inside. It gets really, really hot inside of these, and the casket and the body will disintegrate quickly. And then you can use it typically a year and a day later. That's not a law, but a New Orleans tradition.
What do they do then with the casket and the remains in order to use it again?
Well, they're usually all that's left is a few bone fragments and casket handles, and those are pushed to the back, and then you can use it over and over. I think they're very green, actually, because you can fit several family members in there.
Okay. About how many people do you think you could fit into one of these? I mean, just take a rough guess.
There really is not much left, so probably hundreds.
Wow, that's a lot.
And then the actual tombs, I mean, it's just, sometimes they have so many family members, they have to move the closure tablet with the names onto the side and start anew.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an awful lot, but it kind of keeps the family together.
It is a sign of togetherness.
So, but I do see down here, this is one of the reasons Save Our Cemeteries is so important, because we see, whether it's age, whether it's the weather, something is happening to these tombs that just, these things are falling off, and that's where you come in, right?
Yeah, our focus is abandoned tombs, so family members are responsible for their own graves. This cemetery is owned by the City of New Orleans, and their responsibility is grounds maintenance. A lot of families have died off, or they don't even know they own a tomb, so they fall into disrepair, and that's where we try to come in and help out.
And I do see some really new brick facing on one of those tombs down there. So that's your work, isn't it?
Yes, this was a vault that was wide open, and people were gawking and trying to see if there were remains inside. And this is sort of what prompted our Open Tombs project, where we just started closing up vaults in city cemeteries, and that was repaired in, I believe, 2014, early 2015, and we've been closing them up ever since.
It wasn't cheap to be buried in a cemetery like this, but New Orleans is a city of enterprising people, and they came up with a solution: society tombs. Groups of people with common backgrounds, perhaps belonging to a certain profession. A religious group like the Knights of Columbus, even immigrants from the same country, pooled their resources for a common tomb. If you paid a fee, your family was guaranteed a place for burial. Save Our Cemeteries helped restore several vaults in this society tomb.
There were some open vaults, just once again, open vaults. So we closed three of these. This one down here had visible remains.
Have you seen human remains while you're doing this work?
Several times.
Could you rest in peace if you knew curious visitors could just peek in your tomb and look at your remains? Well, consider this. Exposure makes the dead vulnerable to far more than idle curiosity.
Unfortunately, sometimes these open vaults attract individuals who like to mess with the bones. We had a recent incident. This individual was stealing bones out of one of the local cemeteries and selling them on the internet and using them in spells. And so a lot of people, of course, contacted us and asked, what can we do about this? This is disgraceful. So I contacted the proper person at the state level, and that person was prosecuted for it. We take that very seriously.
Valence is a beautiful cemetery. It's easy to feel envious of people lucky enough to have the chance to be buried here. But guess what? You have a chance to be buried here too, or in one of the other historic cemeteries in the city.
In fact, all of the cemeteries in New Orleans are still active.
Okay.
You can still buy cemetery property in a tomb, and a lot of people are fascinated by that. A lot of our tour guides have family tombs, and they like to point them out to guests on the tour, and they're fascinated because they didn't think we still use these.
Yes, if you've got the money, you can buy a place to spend eternity in one of New Orleans' beautiful historic cemeteries. But what happens if you don't have the money? Then you may end up in a place like this. This cemetery is a stark contrast to the elegance of so many other cemeteries in the city. This is as bare bones as it gets, because that's all most of the people who bury loved ones here can afford. Now, did you think that bare bones comment was a slip of the tongue? Oh, I meant that. Some of the bodies aren't buried very deep here. You can tell many of these graves were not dug by professionals. So bare bones? It's a reality. When it rains hard and long, as it often does here on the Gulf Coast, some of those bones don't stay put. They're exposed. And as Amanda Walker just told us, some people who visit the graveyard at those times might like to walk away with a little souvenir. If your left femur can end up on eBay, can you really call this a resting place?
You can tell that the people who bury their dead in this cemetery try their best to honor them. Here and there are mementos on some of the graves, stuffed animals, statues of saints, and other keepsakes that offer a simple, meaningful message to the dead. I remember you. People buried here may have less money, but they weren't loved any less because of it. Some of the graves have no markers, others have very basic markers like this and this.
And this. Yeah, this gem. I mean, someone thought this was a good idea. God, that tombstone. I just don't have any words for it. Well, actually, I do have a word. We all know what that word is. I mean, how could you look at the thing and see anything else? Oh, but it gets better, because the inscription reads, "In loving memory of my mother." Talk about an Oedipus wreck. Okay, moving onward. Now, this cemetery started out as a potter's field, where people with no or little resources like the homeless or the very poor were buried. There are many historic cemeteries that have potter's fields, and much like this one, they are very plain, very basic.
And sometimes very unnoticeable. This potter's field isn't in New Orleans, it's in Atlanta's historic Oakland Cemetery. Do you think it looks more like a place where you'd play Frisbee? Well, go ahead. That's exactly what the city wants.
Well, of course, it's more than a cemetery. It is a city park, and so people take advantage of it as a city park. Many years ago, people were afraid to go to the cemeteries and walk around because everyone thought, well, you were stepping on the grave or you were stepping on mama or grandpa or something. So, but here, people come here to jog, to picnic, do special tours. We do weddings, we do a lot of different things here, so that's what makes it real special. People are not afraid to come here and just to enjoy it as an outdoor park.
When I tell people I work at the cemetery, their mind goes immediately to a memory garden and just tombstones. They go, no, you don't understand. We have 55 beautiful mausolea, the art, the architecture, the important urban green space. We're so much, it's so unique. You've got to come through the gates and experience for yourself to understand what it's all about. And that to me really makes me want to get up in the morning and come to work and share that with the community and with the city.
On a warm spring morning like this, it seems perfectly natural to be spending some quality time outdoors. And with Sam and Dave guiding me, they're giving me an extra bonus. One of my other favorite things, a lesson in history.
In 1850, there were about 2,600 people living in Atlanta. The city followed said, well, we need to find some space to bury the dead of our growing metropolis. So between 1850 and 1867, all the 48 acres was acquired.
This was actually farmland at one point, and the city actually bought this land from a family. And as Atlanta began to grow and everything, they needed someone to bury their loved ones. And so they bought this land, which was considered, again, the country. And so this is where a lot of the movers and the shakers of Atlanta are buried. Governors, mayors, city leaders.
Yes, we do have a lot of famous folks buried here, but as I like to say, in that time period, 1850, 60, 70, it didn't really matter if you were the owner of the railroad, you rode it or slept under it. This is where you were buried. This was Atlanta's burial ground for everyone. And so it is a reflection of the city, and it is a reflection of the people who were pioneers in this city, basically paving the paths upon which we walk today.
One of the old words for a burial ground was necropolis, which means city of the dead. Like the living cities they served, many old cemeteries were clearly divided into sections for different social groups. Oakland reflects that as well, including a section formed about a decade after Oakland was founded for Atlanta's then small Jewish population.
In 1860, there were probably 60 Jewish citizens in Atlanta, and they formed the first congregation was from folks that had come here from Germany. They had, I guess, we really represent one of the oldest Jewish burial grounds in the state outside of Savannah. So they started matriculating up this way. They found in Atlanta, they founded the Hebrew Benevolent Society, which now is the Temple. That particular congregation was more, not as traditional, let's say, and so their burial customs are about like you would see in any other area here in the cemetery. Mm-hmm. To my right, you see a whole nother architecturally compelling burial imagery, and that's a later congregation that came here from Russia, Eastern Europe. These folks are a little more traditional in their customs and values, and so their burial customs are quite like you would see in Czechoslovakia or Prague or in Russian sections. So a little more efficient use of land, shoulder to shoulder, toe to toe. So probably didn't have as much means as their German brethren, and so they made more efficient use of their property. In the Jewish sections, people leave rocks, on top of tombstones to let folks know that someone's been there. And I think when the Jewish people were wandering in the desert, there wasn't. You didn't want to leave something that was going to deteriorate. You wanted to leave something that was permanent, because who knows when anybody would be coming back. Here, they leave golf balls in homage to Bobby Jones, the greatest amateur golfer to ever play the game. And he's buried here in his wife's burial ground, the Malone family. Bobby, of course, started the Augusta National Golf Course and Tournament after having won the Grand Slam of golf, the 4 major tournaments of its day in 1929, and then he retired.
Atlanta has a rich history, but it's a very mixed history with very dark periods. There's no way to avoid discussing the time when slavery was part of this city's life. It's reflected here too, an entire section where former slaves are buried.
The cemetery was segregated, in 1850. So we did have the different sections, the African American section, the Jewish section, the Confederate section, and even now, what I call it was the white section, but it is history. And so this part was set aside for the African American burial ground. Now this was the original section for them. There was a part called the Slave Square, where the African Americans were originally buried. It may not look as elaborate. Of course, African Americans didn't have a lot of money that a lot of other people had during that time. So you don't see the large monuments, a lot of mausoleums, a lot of the walls and things that you see in other parts of the cemetery, which works well for our ground crew because it's easy to maintain.
There are over 12,000 people buried in the African American section, but there are almost no markers. This is staggering to me. 12,000 people, 12,000 lives, 12,000 sets of dreams, hopes, sorrows, and struggles, as well as laughter and love, and yet nothing on their final resting place to mark their existence, their stories. And just like some of the graves in that cemetery in New Orleans where bones rise from the ground, it mostly comes down to one thing: money.
And you see the same thing even in the other parts of the cemetery. There are a lot of families that come in and they say, well, my loved one don't have a headstone. It's not they didn't have the money, they just didn't want a headstone.
Okay.
So you'll see that all throughout. But here, many people here didn't have headstones just because they didn't have the money, to buy. And a lot of people here had businesses, but a lot of people who are buried here were slaves.
And so, is it fair to say there's no real way to know who might be buried where in some of these unmarked areas?
In this area here, we actually know everyone who's buried here.
Okay.
We know where they're buried. In the Potter's Field section, it might be a little different. We have the names of the people, we just don't know the location.
Where will you find rest when the time comes? Will it be your decision, or will others decide how your body is taken care of? I know I can't leave that up to others. It's just not my way to make others do the work when I can take care of it myself. But where do you start with a decision like this? After learning what happens during an embalming and finding out that some cemeteries don't guarantee eternal rest, I'm uneasy about going the traditional route. What many people don't realize, what I didn't realize until I started doing some research, is that there are more options than you might think. Alternative burial options are gaining momentum across the country, and I'm definitely alternative. So is this place. This is Honey Creek Woodlands, a burial ground just outside of Atlanta. That's right, a burial ground. Confused? Looking for gravestones and mausoleums? Don't see anything that would even indicate that this is a place where graves are located? That's precisely the point. This is a green cemetery.
When Morgan told me we were going to do a shoot at a green cemetery, I didn't know what he was talking about. Then when he told me why we were going, it kind of blew me away. I had no idea this was more to Morgan than just a fact-finding mission. It was a personal mission.
Shopping for your own grave isn't high up on everyone's to-do list, but since none of us knows how much time we've really got left, it seemed like a good idea to take care of it now. Honey Creek intrigued me because the burials here are very simple. No concrete vaults to line the graves, and big note, they don't accept embalmed bodies. Everything that's done here is meant to be in tune with nature. This land is under the stewardship of the Monastery of the Holy Spirit, a Trappist monastery just across the road. But people of all faiths are welcomed here, which is good news for me. So is Honey Creek's approach to burial. Elaine Bischoff is going to give me the details.
So the first thing that we always really want to reiterate with people is that this is a nature preserve, and we will never allow burial to overwhelm nature. Nature is the priority here. We like to say that instead of being a cemetery that allows for nature, we are a nature preserve that allows burial.
When I first saw the place, I thought, this is the perfect spot for Bambi to come walking up to me. Everywhere you look, there are trees, lots of wild plants. I couldn't believe this is a place where people are buried. This looks like a nature trail.
A lot of deer, a lot of rabbits. Right after Thanksgiving, we had 40 turkeys out on the front lawn. Wow. The birds, butterflies, that's a big part of what we do, and we're very careful not to disturb wildlife or plant life any more than we absolutely have to with what we do. This is an image of a full-body grave the day of an actual service. And what I always want to call people's attention to is the fact that this is dug by hand. Everything that we do by hand. This is kind of like going back 100 years and doing a burial. So there are no bobcats, no backhoes. It's strictly a couple guys and breaking bars. And if you know anything about Georgia red clay, it can be an extreme dig. It can take about 8 to 10 hours to do a grave. We do actually occasionally have people to participate in the digging. We always have our crew here, just in case, first of all, to make sure it's shaped correctly, because of course it has to be, the walls have to be perfectly straight. And if they get tired, we can't scramble at the last minute to have somebody come in and finish, so our crew is always here.
I have friends who don't believe that we dig graves. This is what I do for one of my livings, you know. And they don't believe that we're actually out here manually digging graves. And I had to take pictures and do something y'all doing, just show them that yes, we do dig graves. But I said I'd rather be out here any day digging a grave. Man, I cut grass for a living.
This was like something out of an old movie. We actually saw two guys digging a grave by hand, and honestly, I wasn't even sure if this happened anymore, or at least in the US, but these guys are working for hours in the boiling sun trying to get through this heavy red clay. It was kind of surreal. Everything is done like it was in the old days, even the caskets.
What we see most often here is a pine box, and this is, to me, it's very beautiful in its simplicity. And I think that most people kind of get this image when they think of natural burial is the pine box, but there are other options that most people have not seen, and one is a wicker casket. I think this image is really beautiful. Most of these images, you'll notice, they draw you in. Instead of when you see them, instead of recoiling, they pull you in.
Now, would I buy the coffin through you, or would I buy it through a third party?
It's purchased through a funeral home. Now, you can actually purchase them online, and there are places where you can buy something that's a bookcase, for example, but when you need it, you take the shelves out and it is a coffin. Also a coffee table. Maybe repurposed wood, that type of thing. So there are a lot of, just like most things, the internet really makes this
makes a lot of different things available to you. This one's been signed, and this is something that we see often, and sometimes to me it's a reason that people actually select a pine box versus a wicker casket, is that it allows you to have people write messages. To me, that is one of the many things that separates this from modern burial, is the family involvement. We love to see families involved. We love for them to be the people who have their hands on the casket at the very last moment.
At this point, I'm thinking, this is really cool. I'm finally getting a break. No one is talking about sucking someone's guts out during an embalming. Morgan isn't dragging me into a cemetery where bones pop out of the ground when it rains. And he's not making me film him getting wrapped up like King Tut. This is a beautiful place, and what they're doing is amazing. It's not about what our previous shoots are about, but then there was a little curveball I wasn't expecting.
Now this is a shroud burial, and this is something that most people have not seen or had an opportunity to see. Sometimes people think this is a little hard to take. When someone chooses shroud burial, we really make sure that they know what it is, you know, so that there's no discomfort for the family. The shrouds typically are something that the family brings to us. So sometimes it's a blanket that has special significance. You can see it's a quilt here. There is a board underneath for the support of the body so that we can lower the body gracefully. And of course, it's treated with great care and dignity. I love this image. I think it's beautiful and simple, and if you didn't know when it was taken, it's very, very timeless.
Elaine said it perfectly. To me, this is beautiful and simple. And the concept of just being buried in a shroud with only a piece of cloth between me and the earth is perfect. It's exactly what I want. I'm sold. Elaine goes through the other options, like cremation. Now, it's true that cremation leaves a smaller footprint in the burial ground, because the ashes are placed in a much smaller grave. But what many people don't realize is that cremation takes a toll on the environment. Now, there's the gas for the cremation chamber, and of course, where there's fire, there's smoke. Smoke that all goes out into the air. The air that you and everyone else breathes. So, yeah, I could give a little bit of myself to everyone in a 10-mile radius as a final farewell, but no. My mind is made up. This is the burial ground for me, and the shroud burial is the way I'm going. Only one thing left to do. Pick out the area at Honey Creek that I'm gonna call home for eternity. Joe Whitaker is going to give me the grand tour.
So yeah, so this is Honey Creek. This is where we take our name from. It flows back behind the monastery and through this part of the property, and it's on its way to the South River. It's about a quarter mile from the confluence at this point. And what I always try to get people to think of is that the entire nature preserve is a living memorial. And even though no one is buried down here by Honey Creek, this is part of the memorial for their family member and for your visitors as well. So we would encourage people, if you find this spot to be peaceful, to know that this is part of the memorial.
I could tell Morgan was already in love with this place from the moment we started down the path into the burial ground. There are 4 separate sections at Honey Creek, and they all have a distinct vibe. The graves are all low profile, no large monuments or standing tombstones are allowed, only small markers that are flush with the ground.
New graves are mounded high, but as the body decomposes, the mound slowly sinks to be level with the surrounding area. The process happens much more quickly in a shrouded burial since you don't have to wait for the coffin to break down. Eventually, there's little sign anyone was buried in a spot at all, except for the marker stone.
So this is our wildflower meadow, and we're really proud of this section. This section's only been open for the last couple of years, and it's very popular. I always say it's for those people who want perpetual light to shine upon them, because there's very little shade.
You may think of a burial ground as a place of death, but at Honey Creek, they're very in tune with the cycles of life. The meadow section wasn't just land that's always been underdeveloped. Until a decade ago, it was a source of income for the monastery.
The monastery had been in the timber business, and so this was a timber forest, and they had sold all the timber, so it had just been clear cut, and it looked like a bomb went off. And to get it back to this stage, what we had to do is we burned it several times, and people don't realize most of the seeds in the ground, when they feel the heat of the fire, that actually triggers them to germinate and to grow. And it's kind of a nature's system of handling erosion. And that stimulated all of these wildflowers and all of these native grasses, and it's great wildlife habitat. I mean, the birds, the butterflies, this is where they're at home. The chipmunk, the rabbit, this is where they hide from the hawk, this is where the deer bed down. And again, in keeping with the theme of the entire place being a memorial, even if a loved one is not buried in this section, we would certainly encourage people to walk these trails.
Even if that was all Honey Creek had to offer, I would have been happy. The meadow area was beautiful. But one thing I've learned over the years is never be an impulse shopper. Always check out your options. And they have plenty at Honey Creek.
So Morgan, here we are in another section. This is a mixed hardwood forest. This is what most of this part of Georgia should be if left alone by humans. We have very little of this on our property, mainly because the monastery's property has an agricultural past, and so much of the land had been cleared for either cattle grazing or row crops and most recently timber. But whatever pockets of land they had that weren't suitable for agriculture were left alone, and so we have this little pocket of hardwood forest, and it's tulip poplar and maple and red oak and white oak and dogwoods, and just a really nice shaded hardwood forest.
I could see that Morgan was seriously considering the forest area. It's private, just like he is. I could see him living in a place like this, wandering the woods like a wizard or a hobbit.
I heard that. What I'd seen at Honey Creek up to that point was great, but little did I know it was about to get much more interesting.
Well, this is our hilltop section, and this is the highest elevation within Honey Creek Woodlands. It's actually one of the higher spots at the monastery. It's very popular for whatever reason. People like elevation, but people have always known, at least we've been telling them from the very beginning, that this would be the site of our chapel.
The chapel was amazing. I've never seen anything like it. Seeing it in the middle of construction was great, but the best part was that we were lucky enough to talk to Clay Chapman, the man who designed this beautiful building.
And you were telling us this amazing story. You put the frame up in a day?
Right, yeah, but the joinery work took 6 weeks to do. But that's the wonderful thing about a well-planned timber frame is it takes quite a while to do that work on the front end. But when raising day comes, it all goes up in a day. So we're primarily structural masons, and in order to be a capable mason, you also have to be a good carpenter. We designed the bell tower and the timber frame to sort of fit into this environment, and we tried to let the surrounding forest influence the lines and the massing of the design. And of course, our goal was to make this a special place, and that was foremost.
And having come here with the specific intention of buying my grave later today, I can tell you that you have definitely made this a special place.
Like Christian said, getting a chance to see the chapel up close was an unforgettable experience. And when we went back a couple months later, the chapel was complete. Being buried right by the chapel would be very special. Between the beauty of the building and the great views, I think I could be very happy spending eternity there. I'm feeling much more confident about the whole grave buying process. Our next stop is an area that intrigues me, the pine forest. Now, you may think a tree is just a tree is just a tree, but I know better. Different types of trees have different types of energies, and that's going to play a big part in my choice of burial site. And I'm not going to make a final decision until I see everything this place has to offer.
So Morgan, this is the fourth and final section, which we're going to explore today. This is part of the monastery's timber operation, at least what used to be the timber operation. These trees are not to be harvested. They'll be left to live a normal lifespan. But we are reintroducing native deciduous trees, so this will become more of a natural mixed hardwood forest. People love the filtered light. Can't say enough good things about shade down here in the south. But you know, only you can know what section's right for you and what spot is right for you. The only thing I can do is try to guide you on our density mission, make sure you're not too close. We are very low density here. But other than that, it's just going to come down to a spot that just speaks to you.
Yeah, it's going to be hard. I got to tell you, Joe, it's going to be real hard because I've seen so many beautiful areas and every one of them gives me a little sense of peace. But I've been doing some thinking, and now that I've seen all 4 areas, I think it's about time for me to choose my grave. I have to say, when I was down here, when we were taking our look at this last section, this particular area got me the most. There's so much lovely shade and greenery over there. It's shaded all around and it just feels peaceful. I can hear the birds. I know there's going to be a lot of wildlife here.
Right.
So can you show me what's available in this area?
Absolutely. So we just want to try to stay maybe 10 feet away from people that you're not related to. This is a very low density facility. So I'm thinking, you know, we've got a grave there and a grave there. If we got to about here, this would work.
I think I can do that.
All right.
This is the spot, man. This
All
is
right.
the spot.
Well, good deal. We'll get it marked GPS and put a tag on it, and it's all yours.
You sold yourself a grave today, sir.
All right.
And after that, it's just a matter of some very simple paperwork. Putting the deal on plastic for a green burial is a little ironic to me, but it just shows you how easy this process can be. While Elaine is out of the room, Christian wants to get into my head.
Talk to me about what just happened.
This has really been an amazing experience for me. I don't know how to quite describe it. I was a little off coming in because, let's face it, I'm confronting my own mortality here. I am buying my own grave. But at the same time, it's kind of liberating too. Now I know it's taken care of, and once I go to the funeral home and make the final arrangements there for how my body is going to be treated after I die, no one has to worry about that. This is taken care of. So all the people I leave behind can just focus on the fact that my time has come and they don't have to worry about any paperwork or any other little problems like that. It's still a little weird, but at the same time, I know I'm doing the right thing by making these arrangements ahead of time. And I hope a lot of people who are seeing this will consider, even if you're not doing green burial like I'm doing here at Honey Creek Woodlands, at least taking the time to do some pre-arrangement for your own funeral to help your family out when it's time for you to pass on.
So Morgan, we're here at Honey Creek and you've essentially made the biggest decision of your life, where you're going to spend your death. And what do you think of this place? Why choose this?
Well, I mean, it's really non-traditional. I mean, look at it. Other cemeteries you go to and everything's laid out in neat little rows. They've got their manicured little lawns and a lot of concrete. There's nothing pleasant about it. I want people to think good things when they're with me, not, oh, here I am, I'm just gonna go plunk the flowers on the grave and get the hell out of Dodge. I want them to spend some time here, not just with me, but just thinking about life in general, and this is the perfect place to do it.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful forest. They have meadows. They have everything you want here. I saw people bringing their dogs to just go on a nature walk.
Yeah.
Some people might find that kind of dark. You know, why go on a walk through the woods where there are passed away individuals? But here it's beautiful and they really present it as natural as possible.
Yeah, and that's very important to me because I've always been non-traditional and I want to be as close to nature as possible, even in death. So I'm not going to get embalmed. There's no chemicals going in with me. I'm not even doing the coffin. I'm just getting wrapped in a plain old shroud. And I think that's going to really signify how I've lived my whole life. Plain, simple, no frills, no fuss. But there is a lot of participation involved in the funerals here. People can actually write on the coffins, or in my case, write on the shroud, and I think that's kind of cool. But they can even help dig the grave. I mean, you can't do that in a corporate-owned cemetery.
Absolutely. I think participation is big here. They were even talking about bands coming to play, and people having a borderline party to remember the individuals that they were burying today. So participation is very high here.
So what's your level of participation like?
I would think it's pretty high.
Okay. So I gotta ask you, will you help dig my grave?
In the next episode of the After Hours Club.
When you know you have to cross that threshold into somebody's house and tell them that, you know, their 18-year-old daughter just died in a car accident. And then you bear that burden of having strafed that person's life. And then you know you have to go get in your car and go to another house and tell the same story again. And then you do it 4 times in one night to 4 separate families. And then the Monday when you get off work, you stay drunk for 3 days. Because you know that you're going to have to come back on duty and go do it again. And I think that's the real horror